So it's great to be in a panel where you can hear a pin drop. So our next panel is a little bit probably more friendly. Sandy Marshall is the former CEO for BioAmber, and he's going to come up and lead the next panel. He's now currently with the Bioindustrial Innovation Center in Sarnia. So Sandy, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I need to clarify one thing. Just I was not the CEO of BioAmber. What did I get wrong? I spent my career in the chemical industry and finished up my career as president of Lanxess Canada. So that's all right. I just didn't want to leave that on the table because there's always a lot of intrigue around BioAmber, and I didn't want all the questions coming to me about that. So first, I just will bring the panelists up. I'll just talk a little bit about Bioindustrial Innovation Canada, just as a start. Our roots go back about 12 years ago in the province of Ontario. Actually, just some government work that was done. MPP Ted Chudley led a commission to look at the chemical industry in Canada, in Ontario, and what was happening to it. And from that report, a group of chemistry industry executives, government officials, and academia got together and started to work on the issues of solving that problem. We worked on those issues for a few years, but in 2007, we came together with Western University and also a group from Sarnia-Lambton Economic Development to put together a Center of Excellence for Commercialization and Research focused on creating an industrial biotechnology accelerator in the Sarnia area. It was built on the strengths of expertise, assets being available, and the broad network of the group that we had working together there. Also, basically on top of that, we also put together an investment fund, and we started investing in startup companies in the bio-based and sustainable chemistry-based space. We've invested $5.5 million in 12 companies. Of those 12 companies, 1 or 2 do no longer exist, but as we move forward into our 5th year of that investment fund, we have a number of companies that are moving ahead very well. One of our investments is Ecosynthetics, so John Van Lewin is on our panel today, and we're very happy that we invested in their company. One of our other investments was BioAmber, so we do have a lot of connections with these companies. Our focus is on commercialization. Our mandate is to create jobs and economic value sustainably in Canada. We certainly have a lot of focus in Ontario because that is where we worked to develop our first hybrid chemistry cluster in Sarnia, Ontario. And we really focus on the value chain, the chemistry value chain from the raw materials, whether that be oil and gas, and more importantly to this group, biomass from its various sources, whether it be ag, forestry, aqua, or municipal waste, moving those up the value chain to advanced manufacturing, creating jobs across the country, and with a real focus on Ontario. So a little bit of a policy overview piece I'd like to throw out here. In this space of industrial biotechnology we're talking about, there has been a renewable fuels mandate that came into place in this country. It has certainly spurred along the development of the ethanol industry and the biodiesel industry here, and I'm sure that Jim will have some comments about that and his discussions and the impacts that have. Government funding models have been really critical to the development of this industry. Certain groups like SDTC, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, whether it be their tech fund or their second generation fund, have had a huge impact in opening up this space. Jobs and Prosperity Fund in the province of Ontario, as well as some of the latest funding that's coming out of the Growing Forward initiatives that the governments are putting forward, have been very critical in making some of the projects happen. Classic example of that is the BioAmber project that we have in Sarnia. The plant is nearly complete construction. It will be starting up early next year, $135 million investment, basically taking agricultural sugars and moving them up the value chain to biochemicals, which will ultimately start to displace traditional petrochemicals and polymers. And a lot of that funding for that project, which leveled the playing field with competitive jurisdictions, came from the Ontario government and the federal government, and had a huge part to play in making that project go forward. It was no and low interest loans. It wasn't grant money. And you talk about getting a return on investment. There was a Doyle Tech study done on that project, which basically showed by the time that plant is built, there will have been more money returned to the government coffers through taxes and income taxes from construction workers and other workers and so on, than all of the interest costs it would have been on to carry those no-interest loans. So as long as the due diligence is done and the project survives and the loans are paid back, these are really great ways for government to assess. US DOE, the United States Department of Energy, has had a very coordinated strategy in the development of biofuels. We've seen a lot of development in that area, and now some of the first commercial cellulosic sugar plants or cellulosic ethanol plants are being built in the United States. Companies like DuPont, Abengoa, and DSM Poet are building plants and getting off the ground with the support of US DOE. This type of consolidated strategy is making a difference in the development of this industry in the United States. And in Europe, there's been a lot of policy developed around greenhouse gas emissions and putting in carbon tax structures or carbon pricing structures in Europe, which has certainly had an impact on the way industry and the bioeconomy has developed in Europe. So these are a number of the issues that are out there that are being done elsewhere in the world. Some are being done here, but some are not being done so well here. So to talk about that, we have a distinguished panel today that I'd like to introduce now. First, I'd like to introduce Jim Gray, CEO of IGPC. It is an ethanol-producing cooperative located in Aylmer, Ontario. Jim has a degree in chemical engineering from McGill. He has spent a long career in the agri-foods world, working with Casco, Ingredient, Greenfield Ethanol on his way through a number of boards. I wonder sometimes how Jim has any time to sleep with all of the activities he's got himself involved with. And so he'll be able to bring us a good perspective on that segment of it. Tim Haig is here with us from Green Manta Technology, a serial entrepreneur who's been around working on a number of technologies for a lot of years. One of the most recent successes was his work with Biox, a biodiesel company that's located in southern Ontario. He's now moved over and is now CEO of Green Manta Technologies, a smaller chemical play here. The last person on our panel is John Van Leeuwen. He's CEO of Ecosynthetics. John was co-founder of this company together with Steve Blumenberger from back in 1996. He again has a career prior to that in venture capital, came in and formed Ecosynthetics together with Steven. This is a company that's involved in making bio-based chemicals from agricultural starches. As a group, they've been very, very successful, and they are one of the poster children, I would say, in Canada when it comes to industrial biotechnology and the success in that space. So questions we want to talk about a bit here are what are the challenges and opportunities that are sitting in front of us in the industrial biotechnology space, and how can public policy help address the barriers to growth in this sector, and really get back to that discussion around collaboration and how can industry and government work together more effectively to address some of these challenges. So on that, I would turn this over to the panel, and I'll start with Jim here on my left and carry it to the...
Thanks.
Okay.
Well, you need the mic? So as far as I'm a chemical engineer.
He's... There we go.
It's on. As the challenges that we face, well, I mean, it's, you know, I'm speaking from an ethanol perspective now, and I don't think there's any secrets about our industry. We've been very highly highly supported by the government, both from the point of view of, first of all, a blend mandate in Canada, which is 5% nationally and provincially. But then also we've enjoyed a number of funds as well, not the Ontario Ethanol Growth Fund and the Eco Energy Fund from NRCan federally. We've known since time began that those funds were going to expire, and they are expiring within the next 18 to 24 months. And we have been preparing ourselves for that eventuality. Speaking for IGPC, we have really taken a very conservative approach since we started operations roughly 7 or 8 years ago, which was let's get our facilities up and running, let's get our balance sheet under control, and then let's look at what we can do with our business to grow beyond ethanol. One of the big issues that we face as an industry is that the U.S. industry largely overbuilt through the last 10 to 20 years, so that there is overcapacity in the market, and we live and die by how well the U.S. industry is doing. So that is a concern of ours. We've actually just come off our best year ever as an industry, both in the U.S. and Canada. I'd like to say that performance was due to fundamental reasons in the market. It really wasn't. It was due to logistics constraints throughout the Midwest. So ethanol could not get to the point of use. So where ethanol is priced in the Chicago market or New York Harbor or LA, there was very little inventory. So as a result of that, pricing went through the roof, and we had a very good year. I can't say that that's going to continue forever. So it is a concern of ours as these grants expire. So that's really one of our primary focuses for our business, and one of the biggest challenges that we face because of that overcapacity in the U.S. The other comment was around public policy, I believe, right? Yes. One of the keys, and we actually just came off of our renewable fuels conference last week, and we had a number of very good keynote speakers, and really one of the common themes that we're hearing is that as an industry, love us or hate us, we don't get fair credit for our impact environmentally. We do not see the fair value of our impact on GHG reductions in Canada. I think we're seeing some traction right now, certainly in the province of Ontario. We've got a new government with a very strong mandate. They're aligned very much with the province of Quebec with respect to some form of value attributed to carbon emissions. We're not likely to see that with the current government federally right now, but we do believe that at least regionally we're seeing some potential, anyways, to really focus public policy around valuing carbon emissions. So I think that's one of the key focuses for our industry, certainly in the future. And then just, I'm not going to speak for long, but one of the other comments was how can we work better together with government? A couple of weeks ago, I spent 3 days doing the rounds at Queen's Park and Guelph, and speaking purely as the ethanol industry, we touch on so many jurisdictions. We touch on energy, we touch on environment, we touch on ag, we touch on innovation, but nobody owns us. We don't have a necessary. That's in many ways a good thing, because we touch on so many jurisdictions and so many portfolios, but nobody owns us. And it would be lovely for us to have a champion at Queen's Park or a champion on Parliament Hill, and we don't have that. So every team needs a quarterback, and we don't have that quarterback right now. So I think that's one of the issues, purely from our perspective, that could help us.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Jim. And I think the point of not having a home, that's not unique to the ethanol industry at all. We also see that as we work along the value chain at biochemicals or biomaterials, or even it really is an issue when you're going to government offices. Where do you talk to? And we've had a lot of discussions both at the provincial and federal level about how do we consolidate that voice together and who should own us. And I think that might be an interesting question of who should own us if one group was to really focus on us and start working across the various departments. So I'll save that question for now. So, Tim.
Hi. Does this work? So my name's Tim Haig. I know a lot of you in the room. I'm actually sitting here as CEO of a company called Green Mantra Technologies, and I need to explain what that is. Green Mantra Technologies is I'm CEO of 3 companies, but I'm here as an Ontario-based company called Green Mantra. What we do is we take post-consumer plastics, so biomass from post-consumer waste, and we turn it into wax. It seems a bit obvious, perhaps. It's a proprietary technology that we have patented worldwide, and it's a thermal depolymerization using a catalyst. All that being said, we take this, so what do? We take a chunky molecule called plastic. What's great about plastic? It's a big, beautiful, chunky molecule that's stable. And the downside of plastic is it's a big, chunky molecule that is stable and never goes away. So we actually turn it into something that is value added, which we call wax. Wax is something that's, I like to say it's 3% of everything, from tires to road surfaces to shingles to lipstick. I don't know, does anybody buy lipstick? Jim does. But we so it's one of those big, we've been dating for a while, I know. But we have this big chunky molecule that we turn into this chemical, which is called wax. A lot of other people are taking this big chunky molecule and thermally depolymerizing it into something called crude oil, but crude is about half the value of wax. So interestingly enough, the Ontario government invested in this company called Green Mantra, and they asked me to sit on the board, and through all of that, before I know it, I'm interim CEO. I'm only interim because acting would require some competency, and so I'm interim until he's shaking his head, until we find somebody that knows what he's doing. So all that being said, we have this beautiful technology where we're taking post-consumer plastics and we're turning into wax. We were lucky enough to raise $20 million to commercialize in Ontario this technology in Brantford. We have a site in the old Cascade facility where we're turning a great deal of post-consumer plastics into wax. And we talked about government policy, and what I think is really important about plastics right now is that we really need to do something about them. They are really, everybody knows, everybody talks about plastics. You know, they actually account for 1/3 of our landfills, and possibly, well, I know for me personally, it's going to outlive my lifetime too, but a lifetime in getting rid of those in landfills. But we have got to do something about this, and we are looking for policy to drive things out of our waste. We are not looking for tipping fees in a company like Green Mantra. We're ready to pay for our feedstock because the waxes that we create are quite a high value add, and all of you you have no idea how much wax. Believe it or not, I didn't know this until I was asked by the Ontario government to sit on this board. I didn't know how much wax was in our whole lives. So I won't go any farther, but I want to say that there are several policy issues from a waste management point of view, and from a when you take a look at wax in things like roads. for instance. I know this is our new mayor in Toronto's bane which is how do you actually build a road faster? Well, if you were to put more wax in a road surface, if we put 3% wax in a road surface, you can extend the construction life of the road for 2 more months on either the spring and the fall. You think, holy crap, should I have the gardener shut down for 4 more months a year? But what it would mean is you'd shorten the length of this construction by several years. So wax becomes a pretty impactful way in our lives to extend these kind of things. So policies are really important to things like ethanol, things like wax, and we're going to hear something about even cooler and sexier on this side. But I just like to put to you that policy and investment is important, and your taxpayers' dollars has just put $17 million or $20 million into our company, and we're going to take off probably a third of our waste plastics out of our market. Thank you.
That's good. I just wanted to make one point on this. You know, we often talk about the value chain with what, the chemistry value chain and moving stuff along it. When I talk about raw materials, we talk about oil and gas, the traditional fossil-based fuels, fossil-based raw materials. But we've been talking a lot about the renewable raw materials. And I mentioned very quickly up front, I talked about ag residues, I've talked about forestry, and I talked about aquaculture. I did mention waste, but I think this is a classic example of how all these these carbon sources that are not coming out of the ground today come around and support us in our ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to become more sustainable in our society. So on that note, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Sandy. Glad to be here. Ecosynthetics is a biomaterials company. To contrast it a bit, to help you understand what that means, I started my career in the plastics industry, got a degree in polymer chemistry out of Waterloo, and then worked for Shell Chemicals and eventually for Monsanto when they were still a petrochemical company for a number of years before sort of going out on my own. What we do today is really not in plastics. We make bio-based polymers that are used more in coatings, adhesives, resins, inks, and those kind of things. So the things that are maybe a little bit less visible than plastics. We chose that because having worked in plastics, we realized that it's a little tougher to make bio-based plastics, although some people are very successful at it. Why did we do this? Well, we started out with the idea, and it was really my co-founder, Stephen, had this idea, based from his experiences working in plastics, or in polymers, that we needed to really make things that were better for the environment. So initially the idea was, can we make bio-based polymers that are biodegradable, for example, or repulpable, renewable, and that's where the path we set out on. 18 years later, it's much more about sustainability and replacing petroleum-based polymers, because when we started this thing, oil was $15 a barrel. It's now been all the way to 140, and in recent weeks, all the way back down to whatever it was today. 66, 60, it's all good. So if you look at the the opportunity for this sector, it's almost better to pull up for a bit, because we're just a small player driving $20 million today a year. We're a small player in a much larger industry, right? So do you folks have any feel for how big the petrochemical industry is on a global basis?
Yeah.
$4 trillion, right? So a lot of that is plastics, but a lot of it is the other resins that I already referred to. So $4 trillion industry that's come into existence really in the last 150 years, right? Oil started getting drilled 1865 or so. So 150 years, we've built a $4 trillion industry. And what percentage of oil do you think goes into petrochemicals? Yell out a number.
10%.
Close. 15% of oil goes into petrochemicals. So we're not the big consumer, but we're definitely the value-added guys, because we don't burn it so quickly like we do in our cars and homes. So you have a massive industry that's come into existence in 150 years. Consumption has risen fast. And really, we've burned through half the oil. If you listen to the experts, we've gone through half of it, we've got half of it left. So if you consume half in 150 years, as the population grows from 1.3 billion to 7 billion, some really drastic things have to happen for it to last 150 years on the back end of this. And that's not happening. So the opportunity is really there, that we have to replace our strategies on how we make these value-added products, like plastics, like coatings, like paints and adhesives, and we have to make them from feedstocks other than oil, and we have to get at this. If you look at that $4 trillion market piece, about 10% is addressable today by bio-based technologies, 10%, okay? And we fit into that 10% slice with some of the things that we do. Another 30%, we think we might have some solutions if we work on it really hard over the next 10 to 20 years. And for a whopping 55% or so of that $4 trillion market, we have absolutely no idea how we're going to move from oil to bio-based, okay? That's a problem. It's also an opportunity. Right? It's an opportunity for our bright minds, our students, our professors, and our entrepreneurs to work on. So that's what I see as the opportunity. We're glad to be a player in this space. What are the challenges? Well, when you replace petroleum-based products, you replace them when they're at scale, right? So when we're replacing styrene butadiene latex in coated paper, we're competing against Dow and Styron and BASF, guys that have been around for 100+ years and who are producing these chemicals on massive scales and who have driven the cost down to very low levels, right? And these are good polymers. So as a new entrant in the space, the challenge is you have no scale, right? Yet the guys that want to use your products don't want to pay any more for it. So you have to compete on price against somebody that has massive scale, and that's a challenge. Because they're not only just happy with, they don't want parity, they want savings. So how do you offer a discount to a commodity chemical when you're just entering the space? That's a challenge, right? So what that leads to, and it's really the biggest challenge that I see, is we are a chemical ingredient supplier. We play in a supply chain. We supply, in our case right now, the paper and paperboard manufacturers, who then go to packaging, and it goes to consumer packaged goods, and eventually ends up in the retail chain. The consumer has absolutely no idea that the cereal box is coated with SB latex, right? And therefore, they're not going to ask for a bio-based or bio-latex coated box, right? So the other challenge is there's no visibility with the guys that really create the demand, the consumers, that what we do is important. So that's another challenge. And that leads to short-termism, what I call short-termism in the supply chain. People that simply want to keep doing what they're doing because it's easy. And they don't really understand or don't give a hoot at the fact that we're going to run out of this stuff probably in decades, not centuries. On the next question of how can the provincial public policy help address these barriers, so I think the government really needs to take this overarching view in my mind of protecting what's good for the population of Canada in this case, and therefore, from my perspective, the moment a bio-based polymer is economically viable, can cost compete, and it doesn't cost them anymore, my opinion is the government needs to mandate it. It's that simple. If we're going to be out of oil in, pick a number, it's not 150 years, 50 years, we better find a balance that we make this oil era last as long as possible. And so there are some governments that are starting to do this, but the use of to mandate to say, you know, you need to use 10%, 15%, put a matrix together and do it over 20 years if you want, but start mandating the use of bio-based materials if they don't cost anymore. Absolutely. Right? It's an easy solution. It doesn't cost anymore, but it will reduce the stagnation due to short-termism. There's often a financial cost to switching from a petroleum-based chemical to a bio-based chemical. Right? You need to qualify it. Your customer need to sign off. You also need to make some modifications to your production line, and so there's some cost involved there. We are doing all of what we're doing today without any subsidies. No subsidies. We're competing right on what we produce here. But what's wrong with the government providing some incentives for these guys to switch? It could be short-term. So it could be that if you implement a solution where you're using 20% bio-based polymers, the rest is petrochemical-based, you get some incentive for having made that switch. It gets us going. Right? The incentive can go away once they're using it, and it covers their costs, so there's no real cost for switching to bio-based. Education, so most consumers don't know anything with chemistry. You have to explain it to them somehow, yet they do understand harmful substances. We saw what happened with BPA. People are becoming aware that formaldehyde, which is widely used, is a carcinogen. So these kind of things do exist. So if somebody walks into an IKEA and says, do you use formaldehyde in your beautiful furniture? The answer is yes. But if they say, okay, well, I don't want that. I want formaldehyde-free furniture, IKEA would change in an awful hurry. And I'm picking on one example. They're already changing. So I'm giving an example that's not too critical of them because they're making the right moves. But if more of that happened, in other words, the government helped educate the consumer, we would see a faster adoption of something that must happen. I think I'll leave it at that for now.
All right. Thank you. So I'd like to jump a little bit on the opportunity here. I kind of made a couple of notes on what John said. Clock's ticking. We have innovations underway, but we've got limited solutions. But there is also in there lies incredible opportunity for us. And I'll take one step back and I want to talk about the value chain again. One of the greatest opportunities we have in this country is the size of our country and the vastness and the availability of the biomasses within this country. And whether it be wood or whether it be agricultural residues or first-generation fuels, but quite frankly, where the world is moving towards second-generation fuels as fast as they can. If you look at what's out there, we in Canada are in a really blessed position in the same way as we were blessed with oil and furs way back when the first guys came here many, many centuries ago. So I guess when you look at that opportunity that sits there with the biomass we have, John alluded a little bit on how can we impact government policy or GHG policy to help us get there. I guess I'd like to get a little bit of the views from the other two and maybe some more from you, John, if you have some, on how can government policy influence this area and help to unlock this opportunity for us?
I'm going to jump in here. I think the most important thing, and John alluded to this earlier, I'm going to use the word market access. I mean, let's face it, petroleum is the biggest industry this world has ever seen. And by 100 times margin, whatever. And interestingly enough, some of our shareholders and potential shareholders in some of the companies I'm doing are UAE, which the UAE is blessed by petroleum. That's where their wealth came from. But they recognize one thing. They're running out of oil. They're recognizing one thing is that the world, for them to extend their wealth, they need to promote market access. There's another word for that. That's called mandates. And mandates mean that you allow companies, clever companies that are doing exactly the same molecule from what we're doing at Green Mantra, you allow them market access. When you are dealing with the scale of a petroleum industry, and I'm not picking on petroleum, they actually ought to be welcoming this. Because if they see that they're running out of oil, let's say in 50 years, and most of these people don't want to articulate that out loud, but the UAE recognize that they are. If they can extend their market by, let's say, 10 years by having a 10% mandate, the barrel that they don't pull out this year in 50 years is going to be worth more. Why wouldn't they do that? So what we need to impress upon our policy as a country is that having alternatives, which are doing exactly the same thing, is extending the wealth that petroleum has created. I'm not competing with petroleum. I'm asking for market access. And this is what these gentlemen need, and that's what we all need, because it will make things better for everybody with market access, which is also the word for mandate. I'm not into subsidies. I don't like subsidies. I'm not a promoter of subsidies, but I am a promoter of true market access. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody.
Yeah, from our industry perspective, I don't think we'd be here today if we didn't have a mandated market access in Canada. I mean, the oil companies, the blenders would not volunteer to blend 5% ethanol on average in the gas pool in Canada. So having that market access is absolutely vital. You know, in another life, Tim and I are working on another project that you know, really will be I think at the forefront, Tim, if I can say that, of changing the sort of the landscape of the typical first generation ethanol plant in Canada, and hopefully we can make that happen. But there again, I mean, we're looking at creating an entity in Ontario that once again is going to be looking at governments to allow us access to markets. I think Ontario recently approved their green diesel mandate, which I think is a pretty much a gold standard in North America, where they're looking at starting at a 2% blend rate for green diesel, but then ratcheting that up, but focusing or allowing the increase in blend ratios as it relates to increased GHG reductions. So I think that kind of innovative work from a policy perspective is lending itself to our industries and allowing these industries to move forward. And unfortunately, we also have to talk about filthy, dirty money here.
Gotta make money.
Got to make money, and we've got to attract money to build out these plants. And without those kinds of without that kind of policy framework that we see provincially and federally, it would be very, very difficult to attract the kind of financing we need to move these projects forward. So that's a quick and dirty from our perspective.
Great. I'd like to open it up for questions now. If anyone has questions for the panel, I'd ask you to move towards the mics. Well, you're all jumping to your feet and moving towards the mic. I'll just ask one question in the interim. And this morning, we had a presentation on frameworks of policy discussions. And the topic, or the point, or the importance of societal values driving policy came up as one of the points. And I think it's relevant here potentially in a positive way, as we've just talked about, as renewables and green carbon. But it also has its negative connotations too, because we fight the discussions of feed versus fuel, or food versus fuel. And even in the chemical industry side, to some degree, it hasn't really popped up there yet. But the whole idea of food versus fuel or food versus chemicals can pop itself up. How do you feel that this is something we should be addressing, and how would we, or should we be going about addressing that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question that does come up, and I'll let Jim talk about ethanol and the use of corn there, but which is an interesting angle. When we compare ourselves to the ethanol guys, which use a fair chunk of the North American corn today, we pay in a comparison. I mean, the gains in yields alone on an annual basis, would allow us to build a $30 billion company if we had to. So. And I think most of you are aware of it. I mean, when my family came to Canada in '76, I think the yield of corn per acre was 80 bushels per acre. And we're now pushing 200 in Nebraska. The records are all above that. So, and we're still getting better. Farming is getting better. Techniques are getting better. The seeds are getting better. So I think if you simply track yield, that alone is enough to fund the growth, at least of the chemicals that we make. So I think I'll stop there.
I'm going to actually just throw out there that this food versus fuel thing is a complete, I'm going to use a British expression, which is going to offend people. It's bollocks. It's unbelievably overplayed, because in the world there are now 9 billion bushels of corn being exported from the U.S. every year and growing, no matter what has happened. And this is an argument that I think the large, I'm going to say petrochemical companies, are allowing to be played out in the market that actually doesn't exist. that the fact that you can take a kernel of corn and you could take 30% of the kernel, which is starch, and either put it here or put it here, and the actual protein element is still intact and goes into the food market, and into grain, and for feeding our cows and all the rest of it. And the whole idea that ethanol is, and I'm a biodiesel guy, so you were asking why I'm defending ethanol. I'm only defending ethanol because I think this argument is a complete and utter sham. And we've allowed ourselves to buy into this whole debate willingly. And I think people need to question this. This is the largest industry the world has ever seen, and this is now, when people get 5% of the market, we're going to try to stuff it. I think people need to, this is a clever group of people, and we need to question this. This is not true. And the fact that we have the whole idea of this starch is not, we're not starving Haitians, we're not starving Africans, we're not starving anybody by putting some of this starch into latex or into fuel. I'm not even part of this industry, so I can't imagine why I'm getting so emotional about this. But I think we, as an educated group of scientists in this room, we need to question the science. And we shouldn't buy into this, that just because people say it, that it's true. So I just put that forward, and I humbly buy anybody else a beer at the bar that I offended. So there you go. Which, by the way, is full of ethanol, which is part of the starch that I like. Thank you.
What he said.
Actually, I'll pitch it with one other slight perspective, right? So high fructose corn syrup, right? So that I think is a problem, right? So if you divert that as a feedstock from going to people's stomachs and causing obesity and heart disease and all these other bad things. It's driving the drug industry, of course, so sorry about all the drug guys, but from a pure public health and interest point of view, diverting that from a food into a fuel is probably really good for society. It saves billions of dollars.
I think,
Sandy,
your last statement.
yeah, just a couple of quick comments here. And you know, one of the things that our industry does not get credit for, that I would really love it to get credit for, is it's opened the dam in agronomy research. And you made the comment on how yields have improved over the last few years. It's unbelievable. I mean, I know the farming community quite well, and we have farmers that are getting 300 bushels to the acre now on some of their land. So just unbelievable improvements in agronomy practices. But I mean, the fundamental thing is, if you look at the food price index versus the price of a barrel of oil, they track like completely in correlation, and very little to do with how much corn is consumed. So, but at the end of the day, there's certain people that we will never convince that we are not the cause of driving food prices up. But at the end of the day, also, I think cooler minds will prevail.
Well, just to close on that, I didn't get my question answered really per se here, but I did spur a really interesting comment.
We must be politicians.
Exactly. But I will say that I've been around this quite some time now, and this whole food versus fuel debate has been there a long time. And I think the point that I wanted to see that did come out during the conversation was, it's a science-based discussion. And we need to get back to that science-based discussion. Like we have in all of the other life sciences panels we've had up today, we've talked about that and the need for that. And we need to find a way to get that message out and to get it through to policymakers as well as to society. And that's the educational piece that John really focused on in his conversation. Helping society to understand what it really is, and then values come out of those understandings, help science move forward and get us where we need to be. So on that, I think we're past our time, and thank you.